Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Law Pro CPD presented with the Toronto Lawyers Association, Managing the Second Wave, Mental Health Resilience and Resources. I'm going to invite my colleague Mawash to open today's program.
Good morning, everyone. As I'm working from home, I'm speaking to you today from Vaughan, which I respectfully acknowledge is on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Anishinaabe of the Williams Treaty First Nation, the Huron-Wendat, and the Métis Nation, and is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. As this event is virtual, we're not all gathered in the same space, and so for many of you, this land acknowledgement is not for the traditional territory that you may be on. If so, we invite you to take some time to learn about and acknowledge the traditional territory and treaty lands that you are on. This acknowledgement reminds us of our responsibilities to our relationships and the ancestral lands on which we live and learn, and our obligations to those treaties and Indigenous peoples in Canada. As a resource, please visit the website native-lands.ca to search a location to find the appropriate territory acknowledgement under the Resources tab. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mawash. Wow. We have people joining the chat from all over, not just Ontario, but the world. This is an unbelievable turnout for this event. We're all so thankful to have you all here. We heard from you. We heard from the legal community that there was a need for this type of event now, as soon as possible. And it's thanks to your input that we decided to put this program together as quickly as possible. And we had heard from people from Toronto, and we're grateful to the Toronto Lawyers Association, but the word spread, and we are so glad that everyone from across Ontario and even Canada and internationally have joined. And wherever you are, thank you for being with us here today. And wherever you are, if you're on a replay, thank you for taking the time to be with us here again. We're joined by law students, by lawyers, by other legal professionals from a range of practice settings. We have lawyers in solo practice, and I've even heard from law firms who have told us that they've made this a firm-wide event where everyone's invited. We know there are government lawyers watching, in-house counsel, and a host of others. So I want you to take a second here and just picture this. We've got over 1,400 people joining us right now. We have people from all over the world. I would like you to just take a moment and picture that and know that you're not alone. Whatever you're feeling, whatever you're going through, you're not alone. Clearly, we've gathered en masse today to learn how we can manage this marathon that is the COVID-19 pandemic. And so today we're going to talk about some of the reasons things are tough right now. We're going to explore those challenges, not only to better understand and acknowledge their impacts, but also to share some practical tips and some resources we think will help everyone. And so we've got a lot in a short period of time. We're going to dive right in. And I'm going to start by asking Doron to set the stage, because even before COVID-19, even before the pandemic hit, lawyers and those on the front lines of delivering legal services are at risk for particular issues arising with respect to mental health and wellness. So why don't we set the stage, and I'd ask Doron to start us. Thanks.
Thank you, Judah. Good morning, everyone. And when I say everyone, I mean everyone. I was telling my 6-year-old this morning I'm going to be talking to 2,000 people, and she was really excited and trying to conceive of it, really, because I'm having trouble conceiving that there are 2,000. Well, there are going to be 2,000 of you out there. This is one of those situations where, I often will joke when I do a presentation on a wellness topic. If it's well attended, I'll joke, show me a well-attended wellness topic at a law firm, and I'll show you one that has CPD credit and free food. And yet, here we are. With this many people, and I think some of it has to do with the fact that we're able to do it by Zoom, and there's convenience and even a little anonymity, but some of it has to do with the fact that we're all going through something together here. And for all of the tendencies lawyers and paralegals have to, and law students have to feel stigmatized and even ashamed, everyone knows everyone else is going through the pandemic. It's a very collective experience. It gives permission to not be okay all the time. And it creates almost community around that. So people who would usually hide from other lawyers and not let them know they're not feeling well, they're not doing well, now feel like, well, we're all kind of this way right now. So it's okay. So what is the underlying lay of the land? Legal professionals generally have a certain kind of personality, and we don't overgeneralize, but it's pretty easy to generalize with people in our profession that there is a lot of perfectionism, a lot of never being good enough, striving for perfection. So I talk to lawyers who are at the top of their game, working at great firms, doing great work, who are coming apart, who are burning out, and they're trying to rationalize how what got them where they are to the top of the mountain is now rolling them down the mountain. And that's very hard to rationalize. That perfectionism leads to anxiety because perfection is impossible in the human condition, perhaps other than in mathematics. And so they're always chasing perfection and they're never relaxed. And they're always pessimistic because lawyers are very pessimistic in orientation. So they're always looking for what needs to be fixed and what's wrong, which means they're always looking at that in their own lives too. What's not going well in my life as opposed to what is going well in my life. Lawyers socially isolate. They, especially when they're not feeling themselves because they're ashamed, they self-judge, they're hard on themselves. And then when they're hard on themselves, they project that self-judgment onto everyone they meet and assume everyone else is going to judge them harshly too, not realizing most people are actually kinder than that. And a lot of lawyers experience imposter syndrome, the sense of not belonging, of not feeling like they fit in or that they belong amongst a profession full of what they see as superstars. And so instead of talking about it, they hide and they try to pretend that they're okay when they're really not okay, and they're really doubting themselves. And particularly for young lawyers, particularly for law students who don't yet know what fitting in feels like, it is enormously oppressive to the individual and therefore oppressive to their mental health. It causes them to feel down on themselves. It causes their inner voice, their inner critic. We all have inner critics. It causes their inner critic to be very harsh, and they don't know that that's not the truth about them. And then on top of all that, we're adding a virus. So most of the talks I did in March, April, May, June, I called, if you thought being a lawyer was hard, try doing it during a pandemic, because that's what's going on here. COVID in my work as a therapist is overlaid over everything else that's going on with people that was already hard. So welcome to our current situation.
Thanks, Doron. And maybe I'll just mention right now that everything Doron is saying, it has been studied, researched, validated by study after study in Canada and in the United States at a minimum. And if you go to our resource section for the program materials on practicepro.ca/CPD, the first CPD there is this one. The program materials are already there, and you will see some of the articles that can point some of you to literature that will support this. Now, Orlando, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Jude. I just wanted to talk a little bit or to build on what Doran is saying about the personality type of lawyers, paralegals. Potentially, there's some theory that law school does this to you by third year, makes you more pessimistic, more depressed. But I just wanted to build on this thought of imposter syndrome. I've been sort of a wellness counselor at some 5 or 6 law schools across the country. And I hear it so often amongst the law students. I just wanted to give you one example. There was one young woman in her second year, I believe, who was learning law and English at the same time, out at the West Coast, and English was her third language, and she felt like an imposter because she was only getting B's. And I thought, this is a remarkable achievement, yet she feels, but I can relate to it because I felt like an imposter since myself most acutely in law school, but again, when I was an associate, when I made partner, different stages throughout my career. And sometimes I think it's a natural byproduct of pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. But I have to ask myself if lawyers, paralegals experience it more acutely than others, because some of the stories I hear really underline just how much of a problem it is. It keeps people from really demonstrating their true value because they question whether they have true value.
And of course, there's the nature of the work, of course, is also going to contribute to the stress. It's a stressful profession to begin with, and Teresa, you've worked as a crown on some pretty challenging work in the past. Maybe I can ask you to talk a bit about what you're seeing. And for those of you who don't know us, our bios are in the materials. And I'm seeing on the chat, some of you are like, who are these people? Go, please check the resources which are now being posted to the group. And thank you to those who have posted the link. We just didn't want to spend the time with the introductions, but you'll get to know us through the program. So Teresa is not only a public servant who has dedicated a career at the Attorney General's office, but now serves as the president or the treasurer or head of the board of directors at the Law Society of Ontario. So Teresa.
So I just pick up a little bit on what's already been said, and Doron spoke about lawyers, and I just want to say that, well, he's talking about and referring to studies involving lawyers. What he's saying about the pressures on lawyers is, I would say, the same for paralegals, and to acknowledge that as legal professionals, that it's not just lawyers who are suffering or who are at risk. And with respect to our profession, the legal professions, Doron talked about the personality traits, and so did Orlando. And then you add on to that the nature of the work that we do. And I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, Judah, and when I talk about vicarious trauma, specifically with respect to the work that I do. So think about our own personality traits, then about the work that we're doing, the nature of the work that we're doing, and then the pressures of practice and billing and making a living, and either if you're in a firm, about trying to keep up with the person or the associate, or you're in the next office as you, and am I doing enough, and am I meeting my obligations, and the impacts of that has on people. So it's this combination. It's our personality, it's our work, and it's the pressures. And then, as you said, as we're going to talk about now, and now it's a global pandemic on top of that.
Yeah, that's right. So why don't we take this moment to move into the pandemic piece a little bit, and I'm going to pass the moderator torch over to my colleague Mawash.
Thanks, Judah. So yeah, I mean, we've been talking about the pandemic, of course, and we're now going through this sort of second wave of COVID-19 that we find ourselves in, and we're balancing the anxiety we're feeling and trying to sort of work from home. And, Doron kind of mentioned this, but where we're in this shared threat that the entire world is going through. And so Orlando, I'd like to start with you. How do we manage this sort of COVID anxiety that I've heard it being referred to, and sort of fear for our own health and safety, but also our loved ones?
Thank you, Maywash. I want to try to approach this question from two different perspectives. First, as some of you may know, I'm the chief administrator of a department in the federal government that provides support to most of Canada's tribunals. There are about 600 employees. So one perspective is, as a person who's responsible for the well-being of these employees, I'm noticing a difference in the effect of the second wave on the group as compared to the first. In the first wave, there was a sense of, what's this? It's shocking, but we'll manage. We learned about the lockdown on the 13th of March, and we were all out of the office working remotely by the 14th. And I remember, it seems quite quaint now, thinking that we'd be back after an extended March break, and then it became late spring, summer, end of the year. And here we are approaching a year anniversary to that date. Back then, there was this notion that we're all in this together. We'll somehow manage, teaching kids at home. But when you can see or feel the light at the end of the tunnel, I think you have greater resilience for enduring the hardships that you're expecting. The second wave, things seems to have changed. There's certainly a fatigue that has set in. The ambient stress level has increased substantially. If I think of just my own situation, I learned a couple of days ago that my youngest daughter, has to go to grade 6 in person now on Monday, despite this highly contagious variant spreading. She has no online option. She has to wear masks whether she's inside or outside. I have to carry that anxiety with the rest of my family every day and still do my job. And then there's the concerns of catching it yourself, passing it to your elderly parents. All of that rests in some different way with the 650 or so people who work in my department, and probably the 1,500 or so people online, and we all have these concerns. So the problem I'm seeing is, it seems almost like we thought when 2021 came, it would be a fresh new year, everything would be okay, but it feels more like December 60th right now than February the 5th. And so what I'm seeing amongst the employees is greater insecurity about not just financial and their health, but about their own value as part of the workforce. I see a decreasing resilience in the sense that they're more easily offended by intemperate emails that are not necessarily intemperate are read in such a way that they take something from it that's negative. The level of conflict is starting to rise. So you can imagine, the conflicts that you see occasionally in grocery stores, people not walking the right side of the aisle, this kind of thing. That's happening in the workplace as well, but over different subject matters. People are becoming more entrenched in their positions and less willing to compromise. I'm finding less collaboration. And I've been wondering why this is the case. And part of it is that we're lacking this, interaction, spontaneous interactions that we used to have in the hallways and stuff. Tell a joke, tell a story, how are the kids? And that would make everything that we have to do as humans, interacting and solving problems, making a living on conflict, to resolve and to ameliorate the conflict amongst ourselves. And when we've reduced that humanity to a two-dimensional screen, and now you have to book time to talk to somebody. And so there's a lot of young lawyers who think, how can I book time with a senior counsel? Is this important enough to do that for? Who else can I talk to with this, quote, dumb question, unquote? So I think it's very difficult. I don't have a solution for this yet. This is something I'm struggling to find a solution for. And, like, how do you connect when you're so fundamentally and profoundly disconnected? And when you overlay that on top of Zoom fatigue, which I fundamentally believe is real, the last thing people want is another Zoom meeting to socialize, even with coffee breaks and stuff like that. What they seem to want is just a break from the screen, and we can't do that and be together at the same time. What I have started to do is encourage everyone, and this would not just be limited to my department, but the people I connect with on social media and my colleagues, is to reach out to people that you might not normally reach out to. There's a lot of loneliness out there. There's a lot of isolation. And you can really make somebody's day by, even if it's sending in a kind email or something, but to touch base and see if they're okay and if they want to talk, or just to say, you're not feeling well. One of the best tools I've discovered in improving my own sense of well-being is to help others. And so when I'm feeling low, I reach out to someone else to see if I can help them. And that act gives my sense of hopelessness a sense of meaning, and helps elevate my mood. So those are some ideas. I'm sure others have some thoughts as well.
Thank you, Orlando. I'm actually going to take your reference to isolation and maybe pose the question to Dora, like, we're a social species, right? We need others to survive. I read about a French scientist who in 1972 shut himself up in a cave for more than 6 months. I don't know if you read the story, but he's documenting the effects on his mind. And he wrote that in 2 months, he could barely form coherent thoughts. And then by about the 5-month mark, he was reportedly desperate for company so much that he was trying to befriend a mouse. So, we are social beings. So Doron, so what are some of the effects of isolation, for example, in terms of substance abuse?
I was just looking over at the soccer ball that keeps me company while I'm working. So I know what you're talking about. You know what, the isolation, I think Orlando hit it perfectly. This sense of, is there a light at the end of the tunnel or not? We can deal with things when there's a light at the end of the tunnel. When there isn't, our anxiety levels, our depression levels increase, our ability to cope decreases, because more than anything else, we feel helpless. Lawyers don't like helpless. Nobody does, but lawyers in particular like pulling levers of control, things they can do to make it better. And here we have something where, as Orlando said, there was 2020 and it was the worst year, and thank goodness it's over and we got a fresh start in 2021. Oh, look, variants. So much for 2021 being a balm for 2020. In my therapy practice, I'm noticing that January started to be this period when people just got tired of everything. That they were holding it together and doing all the things they need to do to hold things together and get everything done. And they were struggling, but they were, picking themselves up. And then January hit and they had the optimism about 2021, which went away quickly. They had the optimism about vaccines coming in, and then that went away when they realized it was going to take a while. And then the variants showed up. All of this stuff is relentless. And we feel so helpless in our ability to manage these things and our ability to see that it's going to be okay at some point. We can deal with anxiety if we know it's going to have an endpoint. We can shore ourselves up, we can use our tools. But now, in the absence of tools that can keep you going and going and going, people are reaching for coping mechanisms that are unhealthy, like, as you mentioned, alcohol, pot. I can tell you, I know people who drank perhaps once a week, once every 2 weeks, who are now drinking daily, not because they're just inclined towards it or they have some genetic predisposition. They're drinking daily because they're anxious and they're finding that every time they take a sip of wine, their anxiety reduces. They also are now retarding their sleep. They also now are having concentration issues. They're getting dependent, because now how do you get through a day of COVID without alcohol? So you start doing it compulsively. So you're now coping in a maladaptive way. And it's having real other negative impacts on you. As Orlando said, people are getting short-tempered. Well, you know what? If somebody's been drinking, that's now ratcheted up. So many ways that the ways we are coping are affected. And one of the ways we usually cope in a healthy way is by, as you said, Mawash, connecting with other human beings. We are attachment creatures. We are built to attach. Even the introverts like me, who can generally handle being home and not being in crowds, miss people. Just joking around with one person. An introvert still wants to have dinner with one person. And at some point, you're finding yourself thinking, when do I get this nourishment? Where is it going to come from? Oh, I can get it on Zoom. Zoom again, as Orlando said. Where else can I get it? Well, I could perhaps go for a walk outside, but now I have to wear a mask outside too, and I still can't get too close to people. All of those things weigh on us, and we can only sustain them for so long before we start to break down. So what I want to impart mostly is, as a therapist who talks to lawyers and paralegals and law students on a daily basis, I almost want you to know that, I don't like saying it's okay not to be okay anymore, because everyone's saying that, but it is true that there is a collective exhaustion. You're not the only person who's feeling this way. You're not the only person who's not coping well with this. A whole chunk of us are not, for all the various reasons you've heard already. And we reach for the tools we have, we find new ones, and we'll discuss later some of the ways we can cope with this. But it is not unusual or wrong to feel helpless, hopeless, feeling, even some people even feel put upon by the limitations, the societal limitations. That's so normal at this point. And again, a word I don't usually use, but I heard it said that normal is the only place you find normal is as a setting on a washing machine. But there is a collective experience here, and for some people it helps to know that they're not the only one. You may notice in the materials, I wrote an article probably 12 years ago for Law Pro magazine. It's in the materials, called "Debunking the Lone Sufferer Myth," and it was about how legal professionals who I would talk to in lawyer assistants would start asking about if there's anyone else in the profession dealing with the problem they're dealing with, not realizing there were thousands of them, because they weren't talking to each other, because they were hiding. They were stigmatized and scared to talk about it because they thought everyone else was okay and thriving. And that sharing, that ability to share an experience, does take some of the weight that Orlando was talking about off of us. I guess I'm just going through what everyone else is going through, and it is going to be hard some days. And so I'm going to try to be kind to myself around it. And maybe, as Orlando said, be kind to someone else around it. And that might actually alleviate some of my distress.
Thank you, Doron. I actually, I'm looking at your article right now, and one of the things that really stood out to me when I was reading it is, all of us from time to time face challenges that seem unsurmountable. That's not failure, it's life. So in terms of, all these challenges coming our way, again, just, with everything we're absorbing, with disruptions to the work, to our work, which also can lead to anxiety about getting the work done. I want to actually, turn to the treasurer and want to ask, we're finding it hard to concentrate. How can we find time for this other stuff that needs to get done? Sort of focused time for work, time for uninterrupted work.
I don't know that I'm the expert on this, but I think that we are dealing with so many pressures right now. And we have to understand it. We have to acknowledge it. We have to talk about it. Like I'm looking and I see, in the notes, just even this talking and acknowledging what we're going through, and then the struggle that we're facing. I don't know that I'm the best one to talk about the work-life balance. I think we have to make it. We have to make whatever works for each of us work. But we have to take time. And I say for myself now, before Christmas, I was finding I was all the time working. On weekends, I was checking my phone and always looking and responding to emails. And there'd be these email chains that were going on, and I'd get caught up in them. And then I just said to myself, I'm not doing that anymore. My weekends now, I try not to work. I try to put down the phone. I try not to respond to emails, because I understand that when I send emails in my work capacity, I'm putting pressure on the people that I work with. So I'm taking away, not only am I taking away my weekend, but I'm taking away their weekend. And so it becomes an ability for me about trying to be more self-aware about what I'm seeing myself, and how I interact with other people puts pressures on them as well. So I don't know that I know what the answer is, but I think we have to be thoughtful about what we ourselves are facing, how what we do impacts on other people, and then to pick up on what Orlando says, and that is to reach out. So you think, I've got all these burdens on me already. How can I possibly take something else on? But Orlando frames it in a way that's empowering, in a way that it isn't taking on, it's actually taking a little bit off of us, because we're reaching out and we're able to make a difference. Like I say, if anyone ever says to me, why did I become a lawyer? I say I became a lawyer because I wanted to make a difference. And so Orlando, by giving us that nugget that he tells us about what works for him, empowers us to say, how do we continue to make a difference and to help, and in helping others help ourselves?
Thank you. And I think that, what you say as a leader, for example, the actions you're taking are affecting other people. So for example, what you mentioned about doing work on the weekend and sending those emails, people on the receiving end may feel obligated to then work on the weekend because of course, they want to get back to you. It's part of work. So I think that's really important as well. And just to show that, you're human, the leadership, they're human too. So I think that's a really important part of this as well. And we do want to move on to the next section, but Judah, a lot of people have been sort of talking about how managing work while taking care of kids. And although my kids are a little bit older, your kids are younger. So that's why this question is for you. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, you know what, I want to actually zoom that even further out, because the bottom line is we're all going through things. And, I think it's really important to recognize that whatever we're experiencing, somebody is experiencing something as well. And it may not be what we're going through, but there's something there. So a lot of law students promised a first year of law school and they're all online. Ryerson's first year of law school is being done all online, full institutions being developed virtually. We have students who are expecting to graduate, doing so all online, being deprived of that in-person opportunity to celebrate with their peers. Associates and junior lawyers joining government, articling, thankful for jobs, absolutely, but also trying to figure out processes and law firm cultures or employer cultures, or how to ask those questions, or whether to ask those questions, as Orlando mentioned, of senior people who are busy and also struggling. And that's a challenge for everyone. And we've heard that from firms and we've heard that from others. We have senior lawyers who are trying to maintain their teams, trying to maintain their families at the same time, and all in an environment where there have been fundamental shifts. So I manage LawPro's risk management program, and usually here are the big 4 risks that law firms and lawyers face. And these are pretty universal. We have data from our mandatory insurance program that goes back over a decade, but we compare to other jurisdictions, and these are pretty similar. And turns out the biggest thing across all areas is communication. Well, look at us now. Communication errors, we have whole new processes. So we have to balance that and get the message out. The medium is the message, I don't know, but we're all trying to figure out new technologies, new ways of interacting with clients, with peers, and making sure we're all on the same page. And that's really hard to do while we're managing new technologies and don't have the full in-person, face-to-face experiences. We also have our second biggest area is around time management and managing deadlines. Most legal services providers have seen their internal workflows and process management turned upside down in the pandemic. If you were not an already cloud-based or tech virtual firm to start with, if you were the courts, if you were a large firm, if you were a firm that worked in paper and you weren't able to access your office, everything got flipped overnight. And for young lawyers and associates, congratulations. Everything is now, the great equalizer is you're going into new processes just like everyone else. You have the advantage of learning this technology through law school. So you're going to be able to help in ways that you never would have seen earlier in the before times, because you're tech savvy and you've seen this and you don't know what the old systems were. There's no baggage there. You get to hit the ground running wherever you land. But it's been a challenge for everyone. How do we delegate work effectively? How do we get that back and watch it and make sure it's there? How do we make sure that we have all of the documents if some of them are in the office? How do we make sure that we've properly reviewed all documents with our client? How do we do e-signatures? All of that is happening at the same time as there is a pandemic. So there are stresses on the normal areas where we already see risk. Time management is the third, and it's hard to do the work-life balance, and we're seeing it all blend, and that creates risks. And sometimes it's really hard to find the time to say, I'm stopping now. I'm stepping out. My family knows I struggle with this. I think everyone struggles with this. You know, my work is on my phone. That helps me from being now unshackled from a desk. That's great. But how do I say, no, that's enough now, phone away? And so we all need to work on that. And we'll talk about that in the tips. One tip is you might have to work once your kids are in bed, or you might not have the brain space during the day to get into your workflow. So use the time that works for you. 9 to 5 is a thing of the past. Use what works for you. But if you're a creature of habit and you're a night owl now, you can delay send on an email, or you can send with a tagline that says, my working hours are possibly not your working hours. Do not feel like you need to respond outside of your working hours. And those go a long way to recognize the other. So the fourth area of risk that we see is around errors of law. And it's interesting because for the law students on, you're being taught how to analyze law. And for the lawyers there, this is your bread and butter. And so you know that's a risk area. And because you know that's a risk area, you're always on it. You're always studying. You're always keeping up to speed. You're coming to substantive legal programs like those put on by TLA, by the Law Society, by others. You're staying on top of that. But it's been changing so quickly. The employment law bar was changing their advice on a weekly basis through 2020 with the different programs coming and going, and all of these changing laws and government programs. Same for corporate commercial lawyers around lease programs and return to work protocols, and family lawyers with family situations changing all over the place. All of these flare up with different law and also the art of the possible. If we can't get everything done to perfection, what's the good enough that helps everyone? So these are the risks, and all of those risks are heightened. And error of law has become a new error factor that we'll continue to manage at LawPro, although at the moment it's still around time management and communication that are the big ones. And so just being aware of those risks will help. And we have resources, and bar associations have resources around what's changing in the law. And we have time tips on practicepro.ca. There are lots of ways to work through these, but it's important to recognize these risks, how they're shifting through COVID, how we can all recognize that it's going to take a little bit more to dance together now, because the dance music's changed and continues to change over time.
By the way, Judah, I want to note that for all of the therapeutic value of people hearing us talk, there's a whole conversation going on in the chat where people are sharing their thoughts and supporting each other and giving each other ideas. Welcome to community. Welcome to the therapeutic power of community of people with similar lived experience.
Absolutely. And this is one of the hidden benefits we've seen from Zoom. I mean, we're all tired, I know, but I've been speaking at law classes, and when the cameras can come on because it's a smaller environment, the community is still there. And when it's a bigger audience and the chat function is binging, and I'm sorry, I know some of you asked, can you get to this comment? And we're not able to multitask that effectively today, and apologies for that, but it is wonderful to see all of this information coming through. So thank you everyone who's contributing to that. You're helping build this community.
I was reading some of the conversation that's happening, and there's somebody who said that I just feeling 1,500 people nod with me makes me feel better. So it's fantastic, and I think also, just like those questions, just reaching out to somebody, as most of us have alluded to, how are you holding up? What do you need? How can I help? It has the ability to take away someone's sort of invisibility, and it says to them, I see you. I'm here. So I think that's really important too. But now it's over to Judah for the next topic.
So the next topic we're going to talk about briefly, although it's a really important one, is vicarious trauma. And perhaps I can ask you, Treasure, to get us started on that, given the experiences you've worked with over the course of your career.
So I was a prosecutor for 26 years, and when I think back and think through what I did as a prosecutor and what many others of us do, is we deal with people who are struggling or people who are suffering. And as lawyers, paralegals, judges, and justice assistants, participants, jurors, witnesses, we hear and we see terrible things as part of our work, both inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom. We are exposed to trauma and suffering. And for me, in my work as a prosecutor, I saw terrible things that people did to other people. And I dealt repeatedly with sexual assaults of adults, of children, of intimate partner violence, impaired driving causing death, and homicides. I did a homicide in which a 7-month pregnant woman was stabbed to death by her intimate partner. I did another case in which the victim's husband was executed in front of her, shot to death in front of her. And in hearing what happened to witnesses and clients, and in trying to help them, we take on their trauma. And then we add to that the impacts of the pandemic. Think about the added impacts on women who are trying to educate their children from home, trying to work from home, and their demands. We add on to that everything we've already talked about the stressors of the pandemic. And then we think of the stresses on the pandemic on our clients. What about immigration and refugee lawyers who are trying to assist their clients, or your family client? Or what about the terrible cases that are now delayed of murder and sexual assault? So we have our own burdens. We're taking on their trauma, and then with the pandemic, it's being compounded. So what do? Do we just work harder and harder and harder to make a difference in that individual case that we're working on? But what about when the case is over, and how we're feeling overwhelmed and anxious and isolated and maybe powerless and more? What do? And we have to acknowledge, so I'm a prosecutor, I'm a criminal lawyer, but this isn't just isolated to me and my practice. There are many, many stressful, traumatic things in all different aspects of practice as lawyers and paralegals. We need to understand that. We need to acknowledge it. We need to acknowledge the risks to our health. And the risks aren't just to our health, but how does that impact on our families, on our colleagues? And we need to address it. I mean, I could tell you some of the things that I could do to address it, how I do it. But I mean, and maybe I'll do a few and then say to Doron, well, what do you say? Because you're the expert. So I would just say, it's about being able to have someone to talk to. For me, it was always about boundaries and drawing lines. I didn't like to talk about it at home. Which is difficult because my husband is a lawyer. So, it's about having boundaries between home and life. It was also about, in some ways, understanding. When I dealt with intimate partner violence, I understood why victims would come to me and say things. Not necessarily that I agreed with them, but I could understand, which made it, I think, a little bit easier for me to cope. I know I have a filter. I don't read books. I don't read books about sexual assault. I don't watch movies about them. I don't watch movies about violence. In fact, I cover my face when something's on TV. I cover my eyes. I don't watch it because I know that that's compounding the things that I'm already aware of. And about reaching out, if you need help, to reach out, whether it's to reach out to your colleagues, to your family, or whether it's reaching out for support to the Members Assistance Program. But it all comes back to you're not alone.
Thank you, Treasurer. Doron, why don't we go to you next?
Sure. When I hear the treasurer talk about balancing work and home in the context of vicarious trauma, first thing I think of is the criminal lawyer sitting at her kitchen table, which is her office right now, and observing traumatic information, and then having to go and tend to her child in the dining room who's doing their schooling. How are you balancing work and home then? How are you assimilating the information that you just took in and not having it affect your relationships, not having it affect your mood? And so what the treasurer said about talking to people, about self-compassion, is so central to this. And I'm going to point a little bit in the direction of men here who often will think they need to just suck it up. And it's true for pretty much most lawyers, paralegals, students, that they're holding it all in, and they're thinking this is the job, so deal with it. And it's not the job. Human beings weren't meant to see or hear certain things. Our brains weren't built to assimilate certain information. If you think about historical context, in most of history, we knew basically what was going on within about 5 kilometers of our village, and that's all the information we had. Now we've got 680 news bulletins and alerts coming in about missing people and the work that we do. In 1995, to date myself, I was the articling student at the firm that represented the French and Mahaffey families during the Bernardo trial. Because yes, before I was a therapist, I was a lawyer, and I remember that the videotape, the famous videotape, was in the office of the lawyer. I remember thinking he had to watch that to do his job. And what impact did it have? Back then, I didn't have a concept of it. Now, I can't imagine. Most of the people who participated in that trial were negatively impacted. John Rosen, Justice Lesage, Dr. Bradford, who testified. I mean, there are so many people who talk about the impact. My invitation to all of you going through this is take Teresa's advice. Don't hold it in. You have to debrief. You have to take breaks after it. A lot of crowns have to deal with when one traumatic story is over, they go straight to the next one. They got 10 trials in a day. How are you taking time to assimilate the information and to heal yourself and to get centered? So one needs to attend to oneself. Lawyers are not robots. Lawyers do not just take incoming and then just absorb it and keep going. No, we need some time to center ourselves. We all do, whether we're child protection lawyers or criminal lawyers or anyone else. And by the way, I'm going to add in the fact that I would say a huge chunk of the people who are watching us today are in sole practice or in small practices all over the province. What's it like to have a traumatic court experience and then be alone in your office, even after COVID or before COVID? Who are you talking to? Who are you debriefing with? You don't have someone down the hall to go to and talk it through. We need to build structures that allow us to share these experiences and feel like we're part of community the way today is being part of community. You're noticing the impact it's having on people to share with each other, to know they're not alone. When you're in sole practice, my goodness, it's hard not to feel alone no matter what year it is. Now especially. So, and finally, what the treasurer said about boundaries. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but boundaries are everything. Boundaries allow you to function. They allow me, first as a family lawyer way back when, to have kept boundaries with my clients because each one was in a catastrophic situation. And if I had adopted every one of their stories, I would have never slept. To being a therapist where I hear people's stories on a day-to-day basis, and I can be all at once present and empathetic, and at the same time have enough of a distance to know it's not me, it's not my story, it's not my life, and I'm carrying a lot myself. I've got a 6-year-old downstairs doing grade 1 right now, and thank goodness I've got a teenager to supervise while I'm doing this. This is what we're doing during during a pandemic. And then finally, empathy. When we are noticing people going through things, when we're getting short with people, when we're particularly affected because we've had a terrible court experience or going through some materials. One thing I learned in training to be a couples counselor is adopt the concept of get curious, not furious, because everyone is going through something. So the person who just cut you off on the road, you can have them be this blank avatar of evil, or you can think they're a human being who might actually have gone through something. It doesn't justify even bad behavior, but it at least takes the edge off of this enormous judgment we have for them that in the end weighs us down. You know, resentment is like drinking poison hoping somebody else dies. You carry the weight of resentment. You carry the weight of judgment of other people. If you can come from a compassionate place towards yourself, but also towards others, even when you perceive they've done you wrong, in a pandemic, that's particularly doable because we know everyone's going through stuff right now. So I invite people to try to, no matter what their interactions with people are, keep reminding yourself of your capability for empathy. It actually takes the weight off of you. The way Orlando reaching out and helping others is actually taking the weight off of him.
Tons of helpful advice there. And you know, many of the examples we've been having about practice area have been focused on criminal or quasi-criminal, but the cumulative impact and the risk of vicarious trauma is across the board. You can see it in employment and family law sectors. You can see it in advocacy and in a host of other areas. If you have vulnerable clients, if you are in a social justice setting where sometimes it feels like systemically you're coming up against barriers on behalf of vulnerable clients, there are lots of different ways that that the practice can take its toll on you. And so these are universal messages that apply everywhere. And I think Doron and Teresa's advice on this are excellent. And if you're looking for more reading, I mean, the map has lots of wonderful resources for tips, which we're about to get to soon. But I'd also really encourage everyone who's looking for that podcast while they're doing the dishes or looking for that next audio therapy, check out the Canadian Bar Association's new podcast with Myrna McCallum. The Trauma Informed Lawyer podcast is exceptional. There's a whole episode dedicated to vicarious trauma. Doron has an episode there. Lots of wonderful material. And there's also a recently published trauma-informed lawyering guide out of British Columbia. Both of these are really helpful resources for those who feel like this part of the segment has been speaking to you. So we're going to move to the next topic now. And Mawash, why don't I let you kick things off?
Thank you. I've been reading the comments and people are having these amazing conversations and sharing tips and what they've learned. So it's really incredible to see, like, as you mentioned before, community and people reaching out to each other with tips to help. So we are going to move to how do we manage and improve our mental health with resources. And you know, you mentioned the map, but I do want to bring Doron back into this sort of conversation, of course. What resources are available to lawyers or others dealing with existing or potential mental health problems?
Well, there's a lot, and the map is one of them, but it's just one of them. What I'll tell you is that more than anything else, and it's what the treasurer said also, the idea of not being alone with something, the idea of reaching out and sharing experiences and being part of community. So not being alone is about sharing with a partner. It's about sharing with a friend. It's about sharing with a clergy member. It's about not feeling like you are a burden to them. So I have a lot of people who will say, when I ask them, do you talk to anyone? Are you supported by anyone? Their answer will be, well, you know, I have friends and they're very nice people, but they have a lot going on themselves. And they don't need to hear my stuff too. I don't want to be a burden to them. And I will always ask them, if it was your friend going through what you're going through and you found out they weren't talking to you about it because they didn't want to be a burden to you, what would your reaction be? Your reaction would likely be, shut up and get over here and talk to me. This is what friendship is. Supporting someone is an honor. You deprive a person of that honor when you don't lean on them, when you don't give them the space to be a support to you. So allow yourself to be part of community, to be part of a supportive system. And that supportive system can even be, as much as we're going to talk about, limiting your social media use as one of the ways to cope with this pandemic, there's a whole group of people on Twitter, they're called #LawTwitter, who really support each other. I've noticed it particularly during COVID, really supporting each other. Indigenous and Black lawyers being supported, and women supporting each other when some stupid misogynist comment comes up, and all the women rally around and say, yeah, that happened to me too. It's a sense of community. It's a sense of, this isn't just you and it's not right. And it helps to be validated that way. So there's community online too, which can be very, very supportive. And then back to the idea of the map. It is a confidential program, and it is airtight confidential. We don't talk to the Law Society or Law Pro about who calls us. We never will. It is built into our system. In fact, we don't even have direct contact with the Law Society. We have an intermediary company that we talk through, so that the Law Society has no direct information from us other than general statistics. No personal information is ever shared. It is a completely confidential program, and we have to emphasize it because lawyers reasonably are concerned that their information may get out, that it may be shared. If the Law Society is funding this program, don't they want to know who calls? No, they don't. They actually affirmatively don't. From the beginning of the program, they made sure of that. So know that your information is held sacrosanct. And I just saw someone wondering what the MAP was. It's an acronym for Member Assistance Program. And there's a website, myassistplan.com. The brochure is in the material, so I won't go through all the contact information, but we offer counseling, which is no cost. Nothing in the MAP costs you anything. If you're a law student, paralegal student, lawyer, paralegal, judge, this is a free program from the moment you get into law school for the rest of your life, basically, and for your immediate family members as well, which is really something that's a revelation to people. They realize they can go for couples counseling, or their teenage child who's dealing with depression can also go for counseling. That is all available at no cost. It's paid for. Professional counselors. We in the MAP have 2 former lawyers who are therapists now, myself and my colleague Alicia Davies. So we speak that lawyer language. It is a program for legal professionals who understand the legal profession. We speak that language. It may not be relevant to have a counselor who speaks that language. And lucky for you, we've got a roster of hundreds of very, very able therapists across the province. And so that is available to you for short-term solution-focused counseling, for longer-term cognitive behavioral therapy around trauma and depression and anxiety. Along with that, we have a peer support program, which is kind of what's going on here on the chat. Lawyers or law students or paralegals supporting others and validating their experience because they've experienced it too. In fact, I think there's a couple of our peer volunteers on this webinar right now, and I see them commenting in the chat. Don't think I didn't see you there. They offer themselves to support colleagues because they've been through things themselves. Just to sit on a Zoom during COVID, or across a table, or on a phone call with someone who's been there, who's dealt with alcohol addiction, for instance, that's a very unique experience that only someone who's been through it gets. So if I can line you up, and we match people by as many affinities as possible, by gender and by sexual orientation and by culture and by geography and by gender identity and by as many affinities, including particularly the issue you're dealing with, anxiety or career issues or depression, we will match that so the person is a peer to you, has similar lived experience, who models the compassion that you may be surprised to receive from another legal professional, but also a model of recovery, a model of someone who has been through something similar and has come out the other side and has been able to get their groove back, which means you are being shown a model of how you can too. Not exactly the same. It's never the same for any 2 individuals, but the fact that it actually exists, the fact that it's actually possible is very, very powerful. And on that modeling piece, and by the way, there's a whole bunch of other things available. There's nutritional counseling and new parent support. I invite you to look on the website, to call the number, to look at the brochure that's in the materials, all the different supports that are available. And then beyond the map, I also want to mention one other thing, because it was apropos of what something was said earlier about leaders. I invite all of the leaders on this webinar to model the vulnerability and the self-compassion that you want the people that are working from you for you to do. So here we have leaders on this. We have Teresa, and we have Orlando, and we have Judah, and we have Mawash. These are leaders who are modeling vulnerability, who are on a webinar with 1,600 other people talking about their own vulnerability. That is so almost thawing of that instinct to hide. I was once on a webinar, the last webinar I was on that had this many people on it was about 12 years ago for the Law Society on work-life balance. And one of the questions from the web was, I work on Bay Street. Our firm has a yoga room. I'm afraid to use it. And everyone understood what that question was about. And they asked, what can the firm do to work on this? And my answer was, well, the managing partner needs to take up yoga. Leaders need to model the behavior. They can't just be lip service, because people will see it a mile away if it's lip service, and they won't do it. So please, if you're a leader of others, show the vulnerability that the people on this call are showing. There's enormous power in it for the people who work for you.
Thank you, Doron. It's, you know, I was going through some of the resources on MAP myself, and there's a section called Crisis. And within that section, there's sort of articles for COVID, isolation, what you can do. So many resources there. There's also, you know, organizations have their own resources, right? There's a confidential employee assistant plans that organizations have, and you know, I've used them myself and for various things. And one of the things I think some people don't understand is that you know, if you get connected to one person, you don't have to stick to that person if you're not kind of feeling it, and you know, if that person doesn't fit, you can move on to somebody else. You're not stuck with a person. If you know, sometimes it takes time to find the right person too. Also, organizations have various HR policies that can help. You know, certainly we're going to talk about leadership, providing employee sort of flexible working arrangements, sort of time shifting, especially now when there's other obligations during the day, perhaps. Those can be very helpful. At LawPro, we participated in an initiative called Not Myself Today. It was just fantastic. It was from the Canadian Mental Association of Canada. And this initiative called Not Myself Today, it helps the companies build greater awareness to reduce the stigma and foster sort of like a safe, supportive culture. They provide materials, activities, tools, resources to really break down barriers and make talking about mental health, you know, even fun. So we also had these mood buttons that we would wear. And there was a whole box of different mood buttons. I would change one every day. So many people did, and it was really cool because it sparks up a conversation, right? So and it actually empowered you to, you know what, I am going to say that you know, I'm anxious today, and because a lot of times when you ask somebody how are you doing, I'm doing okay, I'm doing good, but are they really? So these mood buttons were really great in that respect as well.
And
also,
Mawash knows this. I mean, sorry, Mawash, but a few years ago, if you'd asked me how I was feeling, if I was feeling anything that wasn't superb, the answer was probably a little hungry. And you know, I've since learned through many that hunger is not necessarily within the category of what's an emotion. Even just having those emotion wheels that you can find on Google that help you explore, you know, the nuances of what you can be feeling are wonderful. And having these sorts of buttons to choose from for every day, just even a gut check for yourself around how are you feeling, and being able to bring your whole self to work that day and being able to share that with your colleagues and to be able to know how your colleagues are doing, it changes everything. It's really wonderful.
If the answer to how are you feeling from someone in the legal profession is fine, I hope you guys will allow me to be somewhat profane and say fine is basically an acronym for effed up inside, nice exterior. So that's just stop asking, or I don't want to talk about it. So that's an invitation to perhaps dig a little bit if they're willing.
Yeah.
And there's been something here in the chat that I think is worth getting to spot on about how do we extend this out beyond our walls to our clients. And we've been asked a lot about that because clients are going through a lot, but you're a service provider. And here's the truth is that the boundaries are vital, and you can clearly communicate expectations with the client from the start of an intake, or if you have an existing client relationship, by just saying, here, quite honestly, is when I am available, and here is when I cannot be available, and here's the expected response times that you can have. And the courts have even signed on to this recently. Justice Myers just released a great decision from the bench about what looked at first to be an urgent matter, but there was a bit of a disagreement about how urgent it was. And at first, the court was canvassing whether counsel would be available for a Saturday hearing, because we're all on Zoom and we can log in anytime. The physical offices don't matter anymore. And, kudos to the lead lawyer for one of the parties, Jonathan Leasis, who said, I've set boundaries for my associates. I've set boundaries. I see what my juniors are going through managing families. I am not making them work evenings and weekends where it's avoidable. If it's clearly urgent, then fine. But in this type of case, it doesn't seem to be that way. And Justice Myers adopted that type of reasoning. I'll send the URL on the Canley link in a moment when I can, but we all need to maintain our boundaries. And we also need to understand that when we're managing client expectations, it's a two-way street. You have to build this into your programming now, is that on the other side, your client, the client on another side of a transaction, opposing counsel, whoever you're engaging with, they're also not fine. They are also working through things, which means that your normal get it done immediately type of preference has to take a back seat. And we need to have conversations with our clients about when is a reasonable time that I can get this document back from you, and then cushion in extra time for that. Same thing for the opponents. Oh, we need to have discoveries. Here's the time frame. I need your thing. And if I don't hear from you from Friday, I'll assume you're fine with that. No, don't be that lawyer. Let's all be civil, and let's understand that everyone here not only has their own time shifting and other responsibilities, but that their clients might as well. Some of their clients might not even be able to access their offices right now. And so we all have to bring this together and think through how the other is experiencing this pandemic and reflect on that. And so as we manage our clients, it's a two-way street, as it always is with our clients, but you can lay out for them what is within the art of the possible right now, and control that relationship, manage those discussions from the very outset and all the way through to the thank you for allowing us to serve you ending of the relationship. So I know that's slightly off topic, but it came up, and we're all in this together, but sometimes some are being pushed a little bit, and we have to be able to create those boundaries.
Thanks, Judah. I'm actually, so I'll bring it back to, this thing about, the different techniques we can use for our mental health. And I read a quote by a French philosopher who said, "My life has been filled with terrible misfortune, most of which never happened." So, a lot of this is we make things up in our mind, and we think about the worst case scenario. So Orlando, I'm going to ask for your thoughts on this one, on some of the ways lawyers can manage mental health.
I can really relate to that quote, by the way. Just to put it in context, I'm not an expert, obviously, in mental health.
Yes, you are.
I would point to Doran. I can really just talk about my own experience and what works for me. I suffer from a chronic low-grade depression that escalates into a major depressive episode every 4 or 5 years, lasting anywhere from 8 months to the longest one was 2 years that just ended in July. And that's often taken me to the darkest places. But because of the stigma that we mentioned, and particularly, I think in private practice, you're afraid that you're going to be perceived as weak, and your clients aren't going to come to you because they want a strong person to fight their most important causes. Because of that stigma, I kept silent and about it, and kept it a secret for until 2014. So it started when I was 9, and I admitted it when I was starting my term as president of the Bar Association. And what I wanted to do to have a meaningful term was to focus the profession as much as I could, lawyers and paralegals all across Ontario, on the question of, you know, this stigma and whether we can chip away at it together. And so what I found in that process, but also in the process of dealing with my own depression, is that the best thing that ever helped me, this isn't my own ingenuity here, but I had suffered through a suicide attempt in 2008, and that really helped me focus my mind on what to do to never let that happen again. And so I became more introspective about myself and my moods, and developed a 10-point scale where I measured, you know, where I gave myself a number every day, and I knew if I fell below a certain point, I'd need to get help. I also made a list of my proudest accomplishments that I refer to when I feel like this loss of self-worth. I've written a letter to myself when I'm well that I read when I'm not well. I've kept a journal since 1986, and you know, I've heard people make fun of this, mostly my daughters, I think, that say that it's like writing about, you know, past boyfriends and stuff. But the point of the journal is it shows me the ups and downs of my life throughout the course of 36 years now. And so when I can see the low points, I know that they're going to come up again, and I see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. For me, I always thought success would cure depression, but it really was hope that cured depression. But what helped more than anything else was to talk to somebody who understood, you know, who also had that shared lived experience. And I could connect with someone and be vulnerable to them, and they would share their own situation. And suddenly, like Doran said, I wasn't alone in the world anymore. There were others out there just like me. And then you find over time with more discussions, you know, I'd do a speech or two, and then people would come up and share their stories, and then you'd see it online and stuff. And you develop a defensive arsenal of friends who can defeat the depression with you. You know, if you look at all the people online and think of them, as we've discussed, as a network or this defensive arsenal that you can turn to combat depression. My friend, the chief of psychiatry at Mount Sinai Hospital, said the best thing that he's ever seen, and now he's written the book on therapy. He's also chair, or was at that time chair, of psychiatry at U of T. He said that better than any medication, better than any treatment that he's ever seen to help people with depression, is talking to someone else with lived experience. So we've got to uncover those people, empower them to talk and share. And I've been seeing that growing and growing, and that alone gives me hope. And like I said, I participate in that conversation as much as I can to help others, because that makes me feel more worthwhile.
Thank
So
you, Orlando.
yeah.
Your Yeah, you're a role model for all of us, hands down, and just the bravery. And I've obviously been hearing your stories over the years, and it's wonderful that you can share it with so many people in one sitting, if you will. I think that I really will open the floor up to ask if people have tips. One of the things, for example, I can share what I do. Is there's this thing concept going around, miracle morning. I don't know if you've heard of it, but getting up a little bit earlier, taking 10 minutes to do 3 quick things. One of the things is, the first thing I do when I get up in the morning is I practice gratitude, and I don't reach for my phone. And this has taken me this whole year to get to this point where I can actually do that. I started last April, and it's taken me quite a bit of time to get to that point. But practicing gratitude, it could be 2 things that you're grateful about that morning. Also, write down 3 main things that you want to do that day. So 3, just 3 or 2 even. And then, so you kind of begin with the end in mind, and just 2 minutes of quiet time. Just 2 minutes of quiet time before you start the mad rush with everything that you have to do. But at this point, I'll open up the floor to see if Treasurer Judah, if you have anything, please jump in.
So my tip is stay connected. And that just really talks about isolation and what we've been talking about. And to soul practitioners out there, you need to know you're not alone. And I see this, and just the amazing comments and this conversation, as really showing us that this is a team effort, that this is mobilizing all of us in the legal professions, lawyers and paralegals, to understand what the challenges are, to confront them, to talk about them, to reach out, and to know that while we have to look after ourselves, it's really important to reach out and look out for others, as Orlando shared very early on. And Orlando, I just want to say thank you. We've heard talk about leadership, but your outstanding leadership in speaking about mental health empowers all of us, and it gives all of us hope. You are a role model for all of us in the legal professions, and I thank you very much for that.
Thank you so much, Treasurer. It means a lot to me.
I couldn't agree more. Orlando is active on Twitter, as are all of us, and you can follow us all there. And you will see the raw humanity of Orlando, as he even doubts sometimes whether it was the right decision to come forward. And I am going to say, on behalf of everyone here, and I hope you have this in video forevermore and in the chat, thank you. You have made an unspeakable difference. We could not even define the impact you have had, but from setting up mental health and offering CPD at the OBA while you were president, to continuing to speak and be available one-on-one and with others and with students, we all we all express gratitude. So thank you. Following on that, in terms of a few tips, I've been thinking a lot about my friends, my family, colleagues who are solo practice or solo at home. I can't imagine what you're going through. I've heard some of it. I'm sure many of you have found a buddy, and I would ask that you find a buddy. If you're a sole practitioner, find a buddy. Find a buddy you can connect with every morning or at a set time every day. There is strength in that. There's strength in having somebody to go ask those questions about in practice, but there's also the humanity of it. And also, if we're talking risk prevention, and as of 2020, I mean, I'm a risk prevention guy, but I've heard it said now, we're all risk prevention people. We're all talking about managing our own risks in our family, in our practice, with our friends. How do we all manage risk? And we all have to find our comfort levels. But if we all find buddies, if you're a solo and you've got a buddy and you can create a power of attorney for your practice, or you have a buddy in case you need to take a step aside for personal reasons at some point through this, you're covered. And that is wonderful for your clients. It's wonderful for you. It gives you peace of mind. So find a buddy. There are also all sorts of ways to continue these conversations and to continue to explore. So the MAP is point one, but also the Mental Health Commission of Canada has created amazing resources that employers, leaders, and individuals can access. I will put them in the comment chat. I will send you the direct links, but they are wonderful resources as well. So my second tip would be to check those out. And there's one other that I want to say, and I've never met this woman, and forgive me, Brianna Needham, but I'm going to mention you by name. Brianna is part of the wonderful community that is Law Twitter, and she actually polled associates and junior lawyers. What can leaders do to help junior members of the profession right now? And this is on Twitter. So my tip number 3 is be like Brianna. Here are her tips compiled from people like you who responded to her Twitter tweet. Number 1 is please just ask, are you okay? 2 is do a planned phone call. Don't just pick up the phone and call. Who knows what time it is in associate land, in junior lawyer land? Maybe bedtime is at 6 o'clock now because kids are having trouble sleeping. Maybe dinner time is at 5:30. Maybe noon might be your lunch break, but it's a lunch break for kids who are about to go back to Zoom school. So plan the call. Video fatigue is real. Try to respect it and, minimize the video chat where you can. Follow up and feedback are key right now. It helps with the connection and it helps to make sure that everyone understands a task and is able to meet the expectations. Recognize and note that students and new calls are particularly isolated. Acknowledge good work and success, yes, even when it's small, and just generally act like you care. These are simple, easy tips that came from those who are looking for that help. And so with those, I'll send it back to Mewash.
Sorry, can I just add 2 things that I've meant to say? One is the Coach Advisor Network program that the Law Society offers. It's really, really important. Advising is short-term, client-specific. Coaching is longer term skills development, best practices. That's number 1. Number 2 is I can't overestimate the importance of legal organizations in providing you with support. Orlando's talked about the Ontario Bar Association, but there are many legal organizations. And for sole practitioners and lawyers outside of Toronto, I want you to remember about your local law associations. They're more than bricks and mortar and libraries. They're resource hubs, they're information hubs, they're support hubs, and they're an ability to really do the contact that we're talking about, the reach out, the stay connected. So I just wanted to say that before we end it.
And let me just say, some of you are here because of their fantastic work. I mean, first, we've got Toronto Law Association, but this gathering was a case study in how movements grow and how communities come together and intersect. Because Toronto lawyers published it, Law Pro published it, Treasure, all these panelists published it. And then we had the associations gather. And it was amazing. I can't name them all, but we were in your newsletters. And we had some of you reaching out directly to me and saying, can we join? And the absolute answer was yes. And it made our days to see that happen. So yes, use your local associations, use the Ontario Bar Association, use the Coach and Advisor Network, which we at Practice Pro mention every time we're out speaking to those who are looking for assistance and our students. When we speak to you, we make you aware that the practice management hotline is there for real live ethical issues you're facing. And the Coach and Advisor Network is there for more ongoing skills development, training, resource, and support. And so lots to get there. And then, of course, at Practice Pro, we have resources as well. And if there's a practical issue, not necessarily one that raises the rules, but just a practical, how do I get from X to Y without getting sued? We take calls as well, and we take hot calls if you're ever suspicious of fraud. So lots of community, lots of resources, lots of ways institutionally, individually, family, everyone is here to try to help.
Judah, could I jump in for a moment?
Yes, Doran, please.
Just to throw a few extra tips in, sort of from a clinical perspective. One of the things I want to add to Judah's resources, there was a course that the Canadian Bar Association, Bell Let's Talk, and the Mood Disorders Society commissioned in 2015 that I was honored to be the co-author of, called Mental Health and Wellness in the Legal Profession. It's available on the CBA Wellness site, cba.org/wellness. It's a free program. It has CPD credit attached to it, I believe, in most jurisdictions in Canada. And it includes video testimonials, including Orlando's, and a number of other people as well, sharing their personal information, but also it's an entire comprehensive course, which includes a whole section on proactive wellness tips for lawyers, law students, paralegals, and I commend it to you. It's free. You don't even have to be a CBA member to take it, as I understand it. In terms of some of the things you can do, other resources, the boundary issue, don't let that slide by. In fact, I saw a great book mentioned in the chat, and I'll illuminate it a little bit. Melody Beattie's Boundaries. Melody Beattie, Beattie, very good book on boundaries. For people dealing with anxiety, there are little techniques that we can use for anxiety. One of the easiest ones is the 5-4-3-2-1 technique, which is simply about when you find yourself getting caught up in rumination and being really, especially if you're laying in bed and you can't get to sleep and your brain is hyper focused on one thing, find 5 things that you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. Seems kind of unusual, except that the idea of doing that is to break you out of the cycle of anxiety and just distract yourself from it. And it also reminds your brain, whatever you're thinking about may not actually be as important as you thought. But when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to get out of it. And speaking of laying in bed, can't let the idea of sleep hygiene go by here as a core element of mental health. Lawyers treat sleep as a luxury and not a necessity. And it gets in the way, because proper sleep means proper ability to process emotions and regulate emotions during the course of a day, and to concentrate, and to have your mood be regulated. So I often recommend to people, so that when time is limited, go online to a reputable website, and I'm going to repeat that, a reputable website, something like Canadian Mental Health Association, CAMH, WebMD, Mayo Clinic. Look up the term sleep hygiene, and you will see a list of best practices for sleep that include any number of things, from having a dark room so that your brain engages and the melatonin ramps up, to not having one of these things next to your bed going off at 3 o'clock in the morning with notifications from news organizations, the light, the buzz, everything. Let me not make it negative. Stay mindful of your substance use during this time. It's really easy for it to sneak up on you and to suddenly be using more and more and more, and you don't really notice it because it's just becoming a habit, and now it's a habit. So mindful drinking, mindful pot use, mindful caffeine use, frankly, mindful chocolate use. Anything you do compulsively as a method of coping is something you should at least try to be mindful of, conscious of. If you're going to have a drink, nothing wrong with the drink. I had a glass of wine last night. It was a lovely accompaniment to my dinner. I didn't have a whole bottle. For some people, they could have, and they may not have even thought of it. They may have just thought, I'm a wine connoisseur. Yes, but if you're drinking a whole bottle on your own, it's beyond connoisseurship. You are using it as medicine, and there's no shame in that. People do that. People going through a hard time use the tools they have available to them. Just be aware which are the healthy tools. The jazz singer Lena Horne once said something to the effect of, it's not the weight that you carry, but how you carry it. We're all carrying a weight. If you carry it in a kind, self-compassionate way that doesn't, hurt you, abuse you, not care for you, you'll get through this easier. You'll be allowed to be going through a hard time and using tools like the social support that's been mentioned, like the gratitude that's been mentioned. Let yourself go through this. Let yourself have, by the way, days when you're not productive, and not judge yourself for it, because those things are happening too. Get one thing done, and then congratulate yourself for the fact that you were able to do that. So if I'm going to end on a point, it's going to be simply self-compassion. Remind yourself that you're a good human being who's doing the best you can in very difficult circumstances. You deserve that compassion. You deserve it from others, and others deserve it from you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Doron.
Doron. This is not even our rapid tips round. We still have that coming, but already there's been so much information. There's been some people asking, and I want to write it down myself. Doron, if you could repeat the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1
Absolutely.
technique.
And by the way, if you don't get it now, just Google 54321 anxiety technique and you'll find it. It's 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. It's just a redirection. It's turning away from what seems like a really compelling, important thought process about that motion tomorrow into, let's think about something else for a couple of minutes. And suddenly you realize maybe it's not as compelling as all of that. And you're allowed to just it's just a de-escalation technique, basically.
It's fantastic. Thank you. I'll pass it on to Judy.
So we are going to start our wrap up. I'm going to go round to ask for one final tip from each of our presenters, and then I'm going to get through some of the questions around some of the logistics, and we'll do the wrap up. It'll be about 5 more minutes, and thank you everyone for staying on. So Treasure, why don't we start with you? What's one quick tip?
Sorry about that. I gave my one quick tip already, and my quick tip is stay connected. We're all in this together. We need to connect.
And Orlando.
Just from a leader point of view, for those who lead others, is to be the boss you always wanted to have. And that is to say, feel free to be authentic, vulnerable, and the safe place that others can come to when they need help.
And Mawash?
So I think that in terms of individual resilience, I think to yourself, what are some of the really hard things that I've already been through, and how did I manage that time? We've all been through something, divorce, death, a health issue. There's always something. How did you? Because I think a lot of people will find that they already have the resilience built inside of them. So that would be my individual resilience. Of course, for tips for leaders, empathy keeps coming up. And I think that check in with your employees, genuinely ask how they are doing, validate their anxiety, tell them that you're feeling it too, because showing them that you're human as well, I think really, really helps. And there was an article that was shared by our CEO, which was the title of it was this discomfort you're feeling is grief. So it was a Harvard Business Review, and it was a fantastic article about this collective sort of grief that we're feeling. So I think that if you want to look that up, that would be my suggestion as well.
And Doron.
I'll throw in 2 quick ones. One is, I've told everyone about Law Twitter. You can even see my Twitter handle is on there. You're more than welcome to come along. I mostly just post stuff about lawyer and paralegal wellness with the occasional puppy dog. But now that I've told you about Law Twitter, get off social media. Go on a social media and a news diet. Just watch 1 half-hour news program a day. Otherwise, don't get news alerts. You don't need to know everything all the time at every hour of the day. There's not a lot of new information right now, and if there is, you'll get it. When I was growing up, you got the newspaper and you watched the evening news, and that was all the news you needed. And the truth is that we are being so bombarded by so much information all the time, we're getting overwhelmed. It's drinking from a fire hose, just too much information all at once, and a lot of it is negative because, if it bleeds, it leads. All the most negative and dramatic stuff is right up front, and I suggest to you, don't doom scroll. Don't go on Facebook and watch all your relatives, tell you that your political views are the worst political views ever. Don't keep taking updates about all the bad things happening in the world. Go for a walk. Talk to someone. Don't let that suck you in. Don't let all the likes and the dopamine hit you get from getting a like keep sucking you into social media. Just take big breaks from it anyway, and from the news. And the other piece was, and I've seen it mentioned a little bit on the chat, remember to breathe and use your breath as a way of resetting your constitution. If you find yourself spinning out with anxiety, remember, focus in on your breath. Take a minute just to focus on the breath coming in and out of you, because anxiety, for the most part, is a future and past oriented concept, the future anticipatory anxiety and worry about things that are going to happen or not happen, past laments and regrets. The breath is in the moment. The breath is happening here and now, between the space a second ago and a second from now. It brings you back to center. Even just to reset enough that you are not spun out and you're brought back to a place where there is no anxiety. There's just the now. So it's a really easy thing. It doesn't take any tools. You don't have to buy anything on Amazon to do it. You just need to focus back in on your breath and just focus on it for a minute or two. You don't have to be an expert at meditation. You're already an expert at breathing. It's happening whether you think about it or not. Just focus on it as a way of refocusing on something that is centered and not anxious.
Thank you, Doron. That's all fantastic tips. And as I conclude, you can all take a few deep breaths. I first want to thank you all for staying. Thank you all for taking time to join. A few housekeeping matters. One, everyone's been asking, are we going to save the chat? Are we going to reproduce it? We are going to do our best to look through the chat, to save it, and to make the core pieces available. We likely are going to have to scrub some names, scrub some identifying stuff, but we will take the themes and we will put something together at the Law Pro Resource Center for this program. And we will let people know when it is available. If you want to make sure you get it, go and subscribe to avoidaclaim.com and we'll send out a blog post. And if you're subscribed, you will get that blog post to say you're getting this. We'll also use our mailing list from today to do this, but just don't want to miss it out. We have recorded. We will be making this available as a replay. We will make people know, we will let people know when it is available. And whether it's now or in the future that you're watching, this program is eligible for 1.5 hours of professionalism, CPD credit, and for LawPro's risk management credit, which you can claim at lawpro.ca. And there's a direct link to claim it from this program's webpage. A few thank yous, because this did not happen magically. There were so many people who contributed. Thank you, all of you from the profession who reached out and told us what you needed, and we took it to heart. And so thank you for sharing with us and for sharing so candidly what you are going through. Thank you to the Toronto Lawyers Association, for Joan Ratig Lang, for Sandra Porter, Stephanie Lang, everyone at the TLA. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful partner and for helping spread the word through the associations who supported this event. We can't name all of the associations, there are many, but we see you and we appreciate your partnership. At LawPro, this was a team effort, and thank you to those who aren't on screen: Naomi Dummett, Sean Urker, Tim Lemieux, Sarah Mayer. Thank you again for everyone who is here. Now, when we sign off, you will find in the future, you will receive an email from the Toronto Lawyers Association for a program evaluation. Please complete it. It helps both the TLA and LawPro develop timely, helpful programming. If you have other comments you'd like to share or just want to reach out, you can reach us at practicepro@lawpro.ca as well. And you can visit us at practicepro.ca at the CPD page to see this program materials and to see other CPD that we have related to risk and practice management tips. We will send out a post, as I said, to let you know when the updates to this program are available. But for now, this concludes. So thank you so much for joining us today. Take care, be kind to yourself, and thanks for being with us this morning. All the best.
Bye, everyone.